My family had no relatives in the West, so we had no direct evidence as to what was going on over there. Watching West German television, which a lot of people could receive, was not explicitly prohibited, but in order to watch West German television, you had to have a pretty sizable antenna on your roof. It happened quite frequently that East German secret police climbed on the roofs and dismantled the antennas.
Hello, everyone. Jack Barsky is a former KGB spy and author of Deep Undercover, My Secret Life and Tangled Allegiances as a KGB Spy in America. Jack, it's my pleasure to have you on the show. You were born in Germany in the midst of a very trying time. Can you set the scene for your childhood? What were your parents up against culturally, economically, and how did that impact their relationship with you?
Well, God placed me on this earth in the far eastern part of then occupied Germany. I was born 4 years after the end of World War II. Where I was born, it was occupied by the Soviet Army. The challenges that my parents had were primarily economic because the land was devastated. First of all, the war itself, from a German side, depleted a lot of resources. And when the Soviets marched in, they were very vengeful, and it's understandable because when Hitler retreated, they had this policy of scorched earth. So they burned and destroyed everything that could have been of value to the Soviet Union, and so the Soviets behaved similarly. And on top of it, there were like many stories. I don't know if their numbers have been kept up, but thousands of rapes where Soviet soldiers raped German women. And it so happens that my parents found each other because of the war. They grew up in a sort of in the same area, but they would not have found each other had it not been for the most Germans fleeing the onslaught of the Soviet troops and trying to get to the West, which they were too slow. They couldn't make it. They were overtaken. But what happened was, as soon as Soviet occupation began, the Soviets began a radical denazification of the east of the part of Germany they occupied, and that meant all the teachers that had any kind of connections with the Nazi Party, with the Nazis, were not allowed to teach anymore. So what they did, they started fast-paced education to train a number of young people who had a decent education, such as a high school diploma, to train them to become teachers. And I don't know, it was maybe 6 months. It was high pressure, like fast forward. And both of my parents signed up for that, and that's where they met. Okay, so and so just as an aside, my testimony in churches that I'm working on a new one, and it sort of has the working title, God Had a Plan for Me, so he probably has a plan for you. It's Jeremiah 29:11. But the quote is different, but you know what I'm talking about, because this is one of the examples that when I'm looking back at my life where I really was never in charge of what was happening to me. I mean, if it hadn't been for that war, I wouldn't be talking to you to this day. And if it hadn't been my parents making the independent decisions to become teachers, they wouldn't have met, and on and on. So now, as when I was born, they were already teaching, which made one economic issue a non-issue, because teachers were very well treated by the Soviets, as well as down later on when East Germany became the German Democratic Republic. That was very smart of the rulers there, because the teachers were going to teach the next generation, and particularly at the higher level, the next generation of leaders. So that was a very methodical approach to bring communist ideology into the mix. So my parents never had a problem with shelter. I grew up initially on the third floor of a school building where there was an apartment, and later on a section of a small school that had 2 apartments and 2 classrooms. It was one of those rural schools where they had grades 1, 2, 3, and 4, and grade 1 and 3 were in the same room at the same time, and 2 and 4 were in the same room at the same time. And the teacher would teach one section, and the other section had to do work by themselves. So shelter was not an issue. Everything else was an issue, particularly good food. But again, compared to city dwellers, we had it better, because I grew up in the country. The village that I spent the first 8 years of my life in had about 2,000 people, and there were a lot of farmers. So, and there was always a potato to be had. There wasn't necessarily a great supply of meat. We had meat typically on Sundays only, and on Saturdays was soup day, and the school provided food, but that was horrendous. So I remember grade 1 through 4, we were walking to school for about a mile, and we had a backpack, with the books and everything, and attached to the belt, we had a pot. I had an aluminum pot with a spoon, and at lunchtime, a young lady came, and she had one of them huge milk cans that usually were used to transport milk in those days, with something that was barely edible. Frequently we would just not eat it and throw it away. So as a result, there was a lot of malnutrition. I have a picture which is really gruesome. At that time, I'm about 12 years old, and I'm tall because I grew quickly, and I was one of the tallest of my generation. I'm still pretty tall compared to the average person, but it's not. It was drastic in those days. And there's this thin thing that has no muscles, no fat, just bones. It's a horrible picture. And it's just because we didn't have enough good food to eat. That's the bottom line. Excuse me. The other challenge was healthcare, and this may this is a scary tale when you think about what we as children had to go through. First of all, there was no medication to deal with migraines. There was no medication to deal with a cold, strep throat, or any bug that would invade you and make you sick. there were no antibiotics, um, and again, no painkillers. So as a result, we had to live through these attacks on a regular basis. The end result of this is twofold. Because of repeated strep throat, I had to have my heart valve replaced about 6 years ago, because the bacteria, if they're not taken care of, actually go to the heart and make a home there and eventually make the valve arthritic. So,
Wow.
but the good news is that I came to the United States in 1978, and since then I've had the flu just once, and I don't take the flu vaccine. I have a lot of natural immunity. When I had COVID, it was asymptomatic, and I just told you I have allergies, but allergies are not a response to a virus or a bacterium. They're like because of stuff that floats around in the air. So lots of challenges growing up, and with regard to clothing and all the other things that we nowadays for granted, everything was in scarce supply. We were all poor. But we didn't know that we were poor because we were all poor. And for instance, Christmas, there was usually one present I liked, like maybe a soccer ball. But everything else that was under the Christmas tree was something I needed, such as underwear and clothes and shoes and stuff like that. But the ball was phenomenal. We played a lot of soccer because soccer is pretty much the only game you can play where all you need is a ball. You don't even need shoes. We ran around barefoot. And one other thing that it sounds horrible, and it probably was, but we just we didn't grin, but we bore it, so to speak. I had my teeth drilled without Novocaine until I came to the United States.
Wow.
I had a wisdom tooth pulled at a KGB clinic in Moscow that supposedly had the best medicine available. They didn't have Novocaine. They used some other means to get me slightly numb, but it was horrible. So it's all these things. Then when I remember them, and I remind myself practically on a daily basis, instilled a lot of gratitude for what I have, and no complaints for what I don't have in this country. I have a perspective like many other people that come from similar backgrounds. Doesn't have to be communism, just poverty. But when you add to this also the lack of spirituality of the country, there was none. Okay, it was all about survival. It was all about discipline. You work hard, you do your job. Eventually, you're going to be in some way successful. There wasn't really a way of dreaming because the dream wasn't there yet. The dream was more like, okay, we're going to build communism together. But there wasn't like, okay, you could do this, you could do that, you could do that. Mm-hmm. When it came time to graduate from high school, then it was the first time I had a real choice, even though the teachers were instructed by the government to move us in a certain direction. And the overall direction was either teaching or science. And I just picked science sort of as a default. But, if I had grown up in a free society, I probably would have been exposed to stuff that I like much more than science. And that's creativity, creating with words, writing, fantasizing. I was good in science, but I really wasn't passionate about it. I was very good. I mean, I was the best in my class, and this was already an elite selection of students. But it wasn't fulfilling the way I'm being fulfilled now by but when I wrote my book, when I write essays, when I work on presentations, and as I'm told you, I'm now working on a new version of my testimony. I like this. This is not work. So it was overall. There's a lot of reasons to complain, but I can't complain because it just gave me a perspective on life. If I had not have acquired that perspective, I might be a lot more miserable than I am now. I'm not the word miserable does not describe me.
Were your parents in love at the time, and did you feel loved by them?
Okay, so short answer is, all right, my family. So I'm talking about two sets of grandparents and and my parents, and there were an uncle and an aunt there, and in my entire time growing up, I never heard a single adult saying "I love you" to another adult or even a child. I never heard the words "I love you" from my mother, and I never saw my parents embrace, kiss, even a peck on the cheek. Nothing. So I can't determine to what extent they loved each other. The guess is that my mother was engaged, and her fiance perished in the war. She was looking for another man. She wanted to have children, and men were in short supply. So she met my father, who was handicapped to begin with. He had that's just the disease that that was cured by giving penicillin. What is that called? He had one leg was atrophied. Fleming invented the medication that dealt with it. What is that called?
I'm not sure. We'll have to.
It'll come to me. That what's happened is I have sometimes a delayed retrieval from what's in my brain, and usually I wait about it half a minute, and there it comes automatically. It's anyway. So but he also he was extremely good looking. It's just like he had this disability. He couldn't run. He could only walk, and he had a limp. And then he caught pneumonia. And again, there was no good medication, so he wound up in a hospital. And what happened with my mother took it upon herself to go visit him and feed him. And she cooked some soup out of rye flour, which, by the way, was continued. We had to eat that not very good tasting soup for breakfast every day because my dad thought it helped him to cure him. And so I had a situation like that when I spent a lot of time in a hospital, and I was at about 16 with I just couldn't move. I had to be stabilized for like 3 weeks. And I fell in love with a nurse. Okay, so I think my father may have fallen in love with his nurse, my mother. Mm-hmm. And none of that was ever shared with, this is just in hindsight guessing. So no, there was no visible love between the two of them. And the way they treated us, it was just, with iron German discipline. And that was it. Now, there were expressions of love, obviously, because what they did. So my mother really took care of us as well as she could. And my father helped out as well because he became the principal of the middle school that I attended. And when it was time for me, to develop my athletic abilities, because I had a passion for running and jumping and kicking balls and all that. But I had some some problems where, in order to get an A in high school for athletics, I had to get at least a B in gymnastics. And for a 6'3" awkward individual, that was a challenge. He gave me the keys to the gym of the school that he led, so I could practice there. So he, to the extent he could, he helped me out as well. But in the end, there wasn't much love. And I give you this one episode that still sticks in my mind, where he did not act like a proud father. I was a smart kid, and somehow at one point, and I learned how to play checkers. And at one point, him and I played a game of checkers, and I beat him. I was maybe 12, 13 years old. And he figured something out. He says, okay, let's play some more games. 10 more. And if you lose, you give me 10 cents, and I lose, I give you $1. 10 games later, I had $10.
That's a pretty good deal.
Well, but the point being is, like, if that happens to me, I have my youngest is 13 years old. If she beats me in chess or checkers or whatever it is, I'm getting up and it says, I'm so proud of you. This is great. Yeah, keep it going. He never played checkers with me again. He just walked away silent. The bottom line is, and again, this is hindsight, this man, he was 18 when the war ended, never had a chance to mature and understand what it means to be a man. And he married a woman who knew that she had to take charge of things, who was very domineering, highly aggressive, not a bad person, but she was just wired that, to take charge. And, the age difference, 6 years different. So when you put it all together, there was really nothing there in my early life that could be put under the heading of love.
Your mother
by the way, now the disease my father caught has popped into my head as I predicted. It's called polio. He had polio.
That makes sense. That was pretty pervasive at that time, and in that climate. And I wanted to verify, your mother was 6 years older than your father?
6 years older than my father, yes.
Okay.
And again, not a surprise, there was the mature men, a lot of them were either imprisoned by the Soviets, prisoners of war, or had perished in the war. Germany lost a lot of men. So there was a shortage of eligible men. So she grabbed the first one that she could get a hold of. And, he was a smart guy. He was a good catch. So, but she sort of, adopted him like he was a younger brother in some way. Mm. So, yep. And if I may volunteer and answer the question that comes next, was there God in my life growing up? Aren't you going to ask that question now?
Absolutely. Let's do it. Was there God in your life growing up?
No. We had our secular gods. First of all, I read the Greek works like the Odyssey and the a couple of others, and I knew about Greek gods, and I knew they were fiction. And we had our secular gods, so to speak, that we admired, and pretty much we didn't pray to them, but we knew that they were the most godlike humans who had ever lived. Marx, Engels, Lenin, and for a while Stalin. But the God that we know as the ruler of the universe, the creator, did not exist in my life. So we celebrated Christmas, but it was a pagan ritual. We had a Christmas tree. We had the lights. We even had the 4 Advents that we celebrated. There was a Christian tradition, but we didn't know it was Christian. And So yeah, there wasn't. I had no idea that the world celebrated the birth of Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, in those days, in my younger years, I did not know the name Jesus Christus. That's the German word for Jesus. Same thing for Easter. We that was another pagan ritual. We just went. Uh, we went on Easter egg hunts. Candy or eggs hidden someplace, and there was an Easter bunny. There was no cross in our Easter. And the first time I opened a Bible, I found one in one of my grandparents' house, and the curious fellow I was, and I was an avid reader. I opened this thing, and I started reading from the beginning. And after about 10 pages, when it came to the genealogy, who begat whom,
Mm-hmm.
I said that's no fun, and I
Yep.
closed it. You if you want to introduce somebody to the Bible, you need to start with the New Testament, not the very beginning. Okay, so and then you bring him back to the beginning because it's demanding. And that was it. I had one more thought here that. Oh yeah. Again, this is hindsight. Um, I I have very good reason to believe that one set of my grandparents were believers because my mother's name was Ruth, and she had two sisters. My mother's name was Judith. I'm sorry. She had two sisters, Ruth and Eva. Case closed. They're biblical names.
Yeah.
But religion was never once brought up, talked about, apparently out of fear that this would do harm. And one more thing. My mother actually told me that she once sang in a church choir, the local church that we grew up, but the one that I passed by every day on my way to school, a big building, never set foot in it. But I don't know if she said it explicitly, but I'm pretty sure somebody talked to her to stop that because Dad had a career, and Dad became a party member, and Dad eventually became a principal, which it was good for ultimately when things got better economically. We had good furniture. My father was one of the first to have a motorcycle, and the first in the village who had a car. And we had vacations in the summer several times in a row at the Black Sea. All of this was privilege that a lot of others didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
So I from poverty, I grew into a somewhat privileged arena, which got better and better. So not only did was I brainwashed into thinking that communism was just the best thing that ever happened to mankind and a noble goal, but I also had good reason to like the system that I was in because it treated me well, and it had something to do with brain power. My father was a smart man, my mother was a smart woman, and then I inherited some of those smarts.
Was the shutdown of any hint of religion a family reason or a political, cultural reason?
Both. The East German, the Soviets, and then the East German rulers did something really smart. They did not forbid religious activities. There was quite a bit of a revival movement going on right after the end of the war. So what they did, they did two things. They co-opted religion to some degree that they could, and I'm going to talk about how that was done. Or they choked off the Christians. They choked off church activities because it was known that the Stasi, East German secret police, took notes when they were watching who entered the church on a Sunday, and there were rumors, but I'm sure the rumors had a foundation in reality, that if you were an avid attendee on a church attendee on a Sunday, that did not bode well for your career. Okay. So now, if you were a plumber or a mechanic or so forth, no problem. But if you had ambitions to get higher in the hierarchy, that was blocked. And the co-option had something to do that they picked leaders, in some case pastors, but also there was a political alliance, so to speak. East Germany was led by the Communist Party, period, but there were 4 other parties, and they were that was called, there's a different word for it, but I can't, in translation, I can't find it. It was a political alliance. And there was the Communist Party, there was a Socialist Party, there was a party for the peasants or of the peasants, a party of small business, and a Christian party. And the Christian party, we have Christians in name only today, and they were similar. They sort of like paid lip service to their faith, but they knew the Bible, and they wanted to play ball. They wanted to, their own ambition, I think, ran away with this whole thing. So what happened there? For instance, during elections, there was only one candidate you could vote for, and that was the candidate of the alliance. And it could be a Christian; it doesn't matter. So in any event, Christianity was choked off and barely allowed to exist, but not buried dead completely. You could still be a believer. And I give you one example. There was a roommate of mine in college. He was a smart guy, and he was a practicing Catholic, and he actually admitted that. Now, he didn't go any further. He didn't try to evangelize. He didn't invite people to go to church with him. But I knew that he was a Catholic. And, that didn't bother me at all, because he was a good guy. He was a smart guy. And to just finish the tale of Mr. Oppenroth, that was his name. When it came to make a decision as to once we were to finish with the undergraduate work, who could go on and get his doctorate, he was one of the candidates. He put he applied for that, and I was at the time youth leader of the communist youth movement, and I was actually part of the leadership of the section chemistry that made these types of decisions. And so his name came up, and I was told to interview the guy, and I did. And I asked him one question: if you are required to take up arms to defend our country, would you do that? He said yes. So I'm very glad that he got his doctorate. First name is Klaus, because he still works. And he's doing really, really good work in third world countries about that. He's a chemist, but he branched into nutrition and how to help particular African nations to have better nutrients in what they're growing. So, in hindsight, I praise God that he enlightened me to say yes, he can get his doctorate, because if I had said no, he would have been barred from that.
It's wild how these decisions that seem little, when you look back on them, can affect a whole bunch of things. So what did this entire scenario teach you about the world at the time and how you were going to survive it?
Well, the world was pretty much very quickly divided into two systems: the capitalist system, the free system, uh, and uh, and the communist system. And not only economically but ideologically and in many other respects. And then there were the others, uh, which, according to what we were taught, were either ruled by the imperialists, the NATO countries, or struggling to free themselves. And there was this competition to bring them over to one side or the other. Clearly, we knew that the standard of living in the West was higher than ours, but we rationalized that because of imperialism. You know, the United States stole the bananas from Guatemala. They underpaid them significantly. And also, when you look at the damage done by World War II, the Soviet Union was ravaged. The United States suffered to some degree because American soldiers died in the war, but economically, the United States came out of World War II ahead, and they helped West Germany, which our main adversary, obviously, with a Marshall Plan to get on its feet rather quickly, as opposed to the Soviet Union, who just dismantled and took out of East Germany everything that was still useful, including railroad tracks. We started way behind, and the Russians had every right to do so. Reparations, okay? We couldn't pay them in money; they just took stuff. So, and it became clear rather quickly that there was also, there was the Warsaw Pact and the NATO that became very quickly, to put it mildly, adversary militarily, but literally enemies. And this got to, what we call nowadays the Cold War, which had its highlight and got much more intense and dangerous. The highlight being the erection of the Berlin Wall in 1961.
It's curious how we rationalize these different perspectives. For instance, when you're eating soup for breakfast and not having bananas, is that because the United States is taking all of them, or is that because everyone is a lot more kinder to the Guatemalans and wouldn't dare underpay them and take the bananas?
It had nothing much to do with the bananas, quite frankly. It had a lot to do with the fact that we had to dig ourselves out of a big hole, and the others didn't have to do that. Now, one more thing I wanted to add is communication. So between the West and the East. So my family had no relatives in the West. So we had no direct evidence as to what was going on over there. Watching West German television, which a lot of people could receive, was not explicitly prohibited, but in order to watch West German television, you had to have a pretty sizable antenna on your roof. There was no cable in those days. And clearly, that meant you signal that you were doing something that was frowned upon in a big way. And it happened quite frequently that, young communists, on behest of the Stasi, East German secret police, climbed on the roofs and dismantled the antennas. Interestingly, and this is a sidebar, but it is of interest. When the question comes up, did my parents believe in the communist ideology, hook, line, and sinker? I don't think so. My mother clearly voiced some doubts in private, and my father was a party member, but that was sort of a requirement for a career. He once ruminated as to whether we should put this antenna up on our roof. And then he decided not to do it. That was pretty wise. So we lived in a area of the country where the reception was really weak, and our antenna had to be even bigger than in the other parts. And the I remember the German word is for this area is Tal der Ahnungslosen, which is translated Valley of the Clueless. So the only thing that came over that the East German government and the Soviet government could not suppress was radio, airwaves, shortwave. We also had some other ways, but I don't know if they didn't have the capability or they decided not to interfere with that reception. I think the capability wasn't there. So, but did we listen to commentary? Of course not. We listened to music. It's the only reason I dialed into Radio Free Europe, for instance, or West German radio stations. It was all about the fact that they had much better music. Okay. Now, that was also, there was no law that says you must not listen to this, but if you were caught listening to Western radio stations, depending upon your position in society, that could have harmed you significantly. So there's another episode that I like to share. I like everybody else, or we were just like, I became a huge Beatles fan when at the age of 16, and kept on listening to rock and roll British to the extent it was okay in West Germany. It was mostly British and American. Until I got to the United States, when I continued listening to rock and roll. But as a student, I lived in a dorm that had very thin walls, and I had the radio on, and it was pretty loud. And apparently, my neighbor, who was one of those, uber communists, he denounced me. He went to the party secretary of our party group, which consisted of about 60 people, the professors and some students. And he told the secretary, this guy's listening to Western radio stations. So the secretary called me into his office. And he said, close the door, please. And then he said only one sentence. Hey, next time you just turn the volume down. That gives you an idea how much or how little a lot of us bought into the propaganda that came from the top. And this very same party secretary, he had the chance, very few had the chance to go to the West for a conference. He and a friend of his, and when they came back in a session of the party group, the most important thing that they shared with us was they had attended a Rolling Stones concert. So the roots of decay were always there. It just took a long time to water them, and then eventually for the flowers to come into bloom when the East Germans spontaneously started demonstrating and managed to have that Berlin Wall pulled down, to the surprise of everybody, to the surprise of East German secret police, the KGB, the CIA, the FBI, anybody, including mine. But when you look at the decay was already in the system, and I said the roots for dissent were never really completely killed.
I know that you managed to go into the KGB, and we won't dive too deep into that story on this podcast. You've done interviews with other folks that are super in depth and super interesting.
May I point out the 60 Minutes interview that gives a pretty good overview about that development. Oh, by the way, 60 Minutes, I offered them a picture of my baptism.
Oh,
They
wow.
declined. They declined. But that's just
Interesting.
that's aggressively atheistic. That's just plain stupid. You don't have to go any further. Just like say, well, he became a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I digress here. Oh yeah, there's the 60 Minutes interview is now accessible on YouTube. You can find it just and go on YouTube and type in 60 Minutes and my name, and you get about 35 minutes of an overview of all of this nonsense that happened in my life.
And we can link that in the show notes below. But Jack, I'm curious, after the KGB, how did you spend the rest of your career? There's a lot of skills that you learned while you were in, a lot of things that you discovered about yourself, different talents and skills. And I know you got into programming.
Right.
What was the path of your career like?
Well, so my first job, just to just make it a little interesting, my first job in the U.S. was I was a bike messenger in Manhattan. That was an interesting career development because I had left the university when I was already an assistant professor, and I was teaching math and advanced math and chemistry. So, but I did it for the revolution. I was at that time I was 100% convinced that the communist cause was a righteous cause, and also there was a scientific foundation for this cause, not only righteous but inevitable. In other words, the evolution of mankind was supposed to wind up inevitably in a communist society. Well, that didn't work out so good. but I was believing into that. Just like it's amazing how strong an influence brainwashing can have on really, really smart people. And we are looking at things that we find in different countries. I just met a traveling evangelist. He's a pastor who has been all over the place, and he currently lives in Kiev, Ukraine. And he also spent quite some time in Russia. He did a lot of church planting in this area, and he is very familiar with what's going on in both of those countries. And he shared with me that there are a great number of highly intelligent Russian people who believe in Putin's propaganda. And we have a number of highly intelligent Americans who believe in certain propaganda that's being widely distributed and that's fundamentally false. And I just want to mention it in this context: wokeness and the ability that you can become a woman. As I sit here, I can morph into a woman with a few operations and some medication. So. Brainwashing is incredibly powerful. Sorry for the sidebar, but I had to go there.
No, I'm glad that you did real quick, Jack, just because it's interesting how that can happen to anyone. My guess is pride, needing to belong, having a certain identity, wanting to be part of a certain class or live a certain lifestyle. And when we have that, it's small, but that's why it's so deceptive, because pride doesn't seem like a very crazy thing. It's not like being aggressive or murdering someone or something that's a little bit more malicious. And yet it can seep in and we can easily be deceived. We can easily justify the frame of mind that we're coming from or that's being given to us. What's your thought? Why is it easy for people who are intelligent?
You're 100% correct, but I want to add something else, and it's either the inability to think or the unwillingness to think, laziness. And in my case, I was able to think, but I really didn't have a good reason to start exploring because as I told you, I was doing so well in that society, and I was on my way to become a member of the elite. Now, what I thought at the time, it would have been the benign elite that would help all the stupid people, including the stupid Christians, to have a better life because they didn't know how to do it. And we have similar things going on in Western society nowadays. We have a very arrogant elite, some of whom aren't that smart, who may well be approaching this with sincerity because they feel that they have to help us as less talented individuals to do, to live a good life. And that means that's the end of freedom. That's the end of the ability to make your own decision. And with that, in that respect, I had the seed of rebellion already in me. I was an anti-authoritarian, and I would have been miserable in the military, but I learned to play along because it helped me get along, so to speak, and that also may play a role in what you talked about. But your analysis is right on the money. I just wanted to add this: Americans don't think much anymore. We like to be entertained. So every time I leave the place I'm living, I'm talking to you from, and I go out, it never fails. I see multiple people walking around staring at their phone. They can't even by themselves for a moment. They can't even take in what's going on in the world around them, which is part of thinking. It's part of taking information in. And when they're not on the phone, they're probably, they might watch something streaming on a bigger screen. But it's, and the laziness is astounding. Now, it doesn't apply to everybody. It really doesn't. But it's a portion of the population that's sizable enough to scare me, quite frankly.
And it may not be the phone itself, but it creates this environment mentally that is dangerous because it enables passivity. It's lighting up parts of your brain that are exciting, and it's really discomfort that causes us to think. When we're out in the world and we can see the harsh things, when we can see things that make us question, that make us uncomfortable, that's when we have to critically think. When we're consuming things that agree with us, that make us feel good, that light up our brain, then you don't need to think about anything. You don't need to wonder, well, why is this occurring? This is a problem. Can I fix it? Do I have a role in this, or is this out of my control? That's at least one take on the issue, but I completely agree with you that there seems to be less critical thought in our society. Now, I want to go back to that 60.
One more thing, if I may, and the inability to understand why you're miserable and how to deal with this leads to the depression, and which has already been proven to an increased suicide rate amongst younger people, and also men, by the way, interestingly enough. So it's not a good picture, and the folks that could do something about it are unwilling or unable. I don't want to point fingers because it might get you and me canceled.
Yeah. Well, speaking with that, after the 60 Minutes interview, is it accurate that where you were working at the time, you lost that position?
Yeah, that was kind of odd. I was already a Christian at the time, and I knew I was going to take a risk to go out in public the way I did. I also knew that I had not doing that did not violate any company rules. Unfortunately, I was working for a company with high security requirements that had to do with the electric grid and electricity and so forth. But so and I discussed it with my wife because the risk that I was taking wasn't just mine. It was risking the family. Because if I did the way it turned out, losing my job, that could have meant hardship. But based on how this all transpired, and based on the fact that I did not volunteer to go on 60 Minutes, that they sought me out, which required a whole bunch of dots to be connected, and I had nothing to do with any of those dots. It just happened, and we both decided it was God's will that I'd be out in public, and so I did, and then I was terminated, but with a nice going away present, without getting into any more detail. But if you don't mind, I want to go back to when I started my professional career. So, and again, it's a lot of the things that I tell you today I wasn't aware of. Instinctively, I was told by KGB when I was looking for my first job as a programmer, to go apply with small companies, because small companies most likely wouldn't do a thorough background check. And I tried this a couple of times, and then I gave up. And then MetLife, it's known that I work for MetLife, so they don't have a problem with that. MetLife showed up recruiting in at the college, and I liked it. And I liked the idea that I would be joining a large organization. And when I had my in-person interview, it became pretty clear that in those days, insurance companies would really take care of their employees to a point where we would be somewhat underpaid, but we would have a job for life. You know, we even had free lunch. When I didn't know about that, that was not a selling point. But you know, joining MetLife felt like going back to Germany, East Germany. You know, like the big organization that you participate in, you create value, and they take care of you. Mm-hmm. And so I felt really comfortable. But this started eating away at my communist ideology, because, you know, we were told that the worst companies in capitalism were the military-industrial complex, banks, and insurance companies. And here I'm working for an insurance company. They were really nice to me, and they paid me good money. And I had one boss for the first several years who was phenomenal. She recognized that I was a self-starter, that I created value. She let me pretty much determine what I'm going to do next. And she probably didn't even understand what I was doing, but she saw the results. So I felt really at home. And there came a point, and I had like a lot of smart co-workers. Felt like the United Nations. You know, we had a Russian, a Ukrainian, a couple of Chinese, a Cuban. There may have been another couple of nationalities I forgot, and of course me, the German, the phony German, phony American. And at one point, you know, I knew that my mission in the U.S. would be somewhat limited, because illegals have a shelf life. If they're really successful in their job, that means becoming somebody else. They become a flight risk. They might actually stay. And I'm not surprised if there weren't a few others who chose that path. I don't know them, but they could well be in the witness protection program. I don't know that. But so at one point I started thinking, you know what? I'm going to miss this. and it also had something to do, you know, being taken care of and working with smart people, but also doing something I liked. And that means creating. When I was hands-on doing work, I created something out of nothing. And I wasn't really aware that creativity was my passion, but I sensed it, okay? Mm-hmm. So And then I got moved into management, and I embraced management simply because there was a ceiling how much they paid individual contributors. So I wanted to create a better life for my family. And I had altogether 5 management jobs in 5 different companies and with different technologies and in different parts of the country. And that helped me with a couple of things. And the most important one in this context is to realize that my opinion about Christians was 100% wrong. Again, the Marxist idea was religion is opiate for the people. So that means I knew that all Christians or all believer of any kind used their religion as a crutch because they needed it. They needed somebody some idea to help them through, to maneuver through life. And here I started hiring people in a country that had a lot more believing Christians than we have today, and some of whom actually shared their faith with me quite openly. Maybe not in the interview, but soon thereafter. And they were smart people. So wait a minute. My ears never
How could
completely
they be
closed,
smart
so I
people
was
and also
open
have
to
a crutch,
taking in
right?
new
Is that
information.
the...
And I said, well, that belief was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that belief was totally wrong because not only were they pretty good, some of them were the best. And the other thing is, the ones that confessed their faith to me were the most reliable workers. You could absolutely trust them. So my intellectual, I never had militant atheism. If I had militant atheism, I wouldn't have allowed Klaus to get his doctorate, right? But it was strongly intellectual, and that disappeared. I mean, it just like there was no room for it anymore. It was debunked. So I just eased over to agnosticism, and I was an agnostic for, well, let me see, about a dozen to 15 years. Obviously, agnosticism, even acknowledged by people who are not Christians but are like embracing the concept of a God. Agnosticism is for the cowards who don't want to dig because they might be afraid of what they can find. And then anyway, and I was also lazy. I worked and I took care of a family, and that was my mission at the time. So I was a loving husband, father, and so I had no reason to really dig. The reason then came when something happened, but I don't want to keep on going because you may want to go down a different path.
Well, what's interesting about that piece of your story is you start to get exposure to something else. It's kind, it's beautiful, you like it, you enjoy it, and it starts to break down those beliefs. And that's why when you're trying to propagate a certain belief, you have to shelter from any other narratives, because once we get exposed, then we're able to develop empathy. And empathy is a dangerous thing for someone who wants control.
Yes. And I used to be controlling, not necessarily controlling of others, but to try to control my own faith. And the manipulative youngster I was, because I managed to manipulate situations to improve my position in life, not to hurt anybody else. And I clearly manipulated people as a spy, again, not to harm them, but, to get something out of them and, do a good job in the job that was my number one job. I did the same thing in corporate America. So, and I always tried to optimize my situation until there were a number of things that happened where I had to realize that I really wasn't in control. The first time I realized it, and that was I was laid off 3 times from jobs, and then I was forced to file for divorce from my first wife because she was unsafe to live with anymore, and that got me into a state of depression that lasted over a year. The first and only time I really can use the word depression to describe my state of mind and my very being. It didn't disable me from doing my job, but I was miserable, and I also pretty much with the regularity drank to go to sleep. So that was the depth of my entire life, and clearly I was open for something or somebody to get me out of it, and the alcohol didn't do it.
When did that change? When did you stop using the alcohol to sleep?
Oh, that started the first day I came to the United States, and I was in Germany we drank beer, and for you to get drunk on beer is very difficult because it has a lot of volume,
Yeah.
and you can't hold as much. There's some people who manage, but I was once terribly drunk when I mixed beer with vodka. So that was a bad situation, but I clearly wasn't alcohol dependent at all, and I had problems sleeping my entire life. But here's what happened. I don't know, something made me buy a bottle of Johnny Walker Red duty free when I came to the U.S., and it was the going through customs and border security was the most tense moment in my entire life. The one at close second is when I said I do when I got married in church.
Wow.
but this one was so tense because I knew that I was very vulnerable for one reason only, that the KGB was not aware of. I was traveling with a Canadian passport, and I had a practice trip to Canada, and I knew very well that Canadians do not speak like Americans. I mean, quite audibly. And my passport says I was a resident of Toronto. So knowing that, and knowing that I had to declare a bunch of cash that I brought into the country, and what I had on me, like a shortwave radio, which was legit, but who travels with a shortwave radio? And knowing that my luggage, I had flown in from Mexico, didn't have the characteristics of somebody who comes back from vacation. So there were a lot of red flags that I was traveling with. So I had to get through this. I made sure that any kind of answer I was giving was really short when I was questioned, and then I got lucky. The border guard was like lazy. He looked at my passport and says, "Oh, what are you going to do here? I just want to look around Chicago before I go home." That was it.
Wow.
But the tension, because they couldn't erase the tension. So when I got to my hotel room, I drank a half a bottle of that heavy stuff.
Ooh.
And I woke up with a bad headache the next morning because, that was way much than I had ever consumed. And that sort of started me using not a lot of drink, not a half a bottle, just like a glass or two, to go to sleep routinely. But during my depression, I increased the dosage, self-medication. Never a good idea, but I had nothing else. I had nobody to go to. I had no mentor. I never had a mentor, by the way. That would have helped in every respect. I didn't have a father figure. I didn't have an older brother. I didn't have anybody who I could trust in, and I clearly didn't have God at the time. So, this is what happens to a lot of people, I guess, who wind up, self-medicating with drugs or whatever it is, as sort of a the easy way out, which fundamentally turns out to be the way not to be traveled, because it becomes as hard as it can get.
It's funny how that happens, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's funny, but when you go through it, it ain't funny. But yeah, I know what you mean by that. It's fundamentally, drunkenness is a sin. And if somebody had told me that then, I would have said, "Yeah, get out of here."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Jack, I'm curious. Now you've spent time in America. I mean, you've been here since you arrived, crossing over from Canada, and you've learned more about this country. You've dispelled some of the beliefs that you were raised with. But ultimately, how can we ever know that we're on the right side of history? And is there even a right side?
The right side is where the United States started with its Constitution. The founding fathers were not, some were Christians. There may have been a couple of agnostics, but most of them were deists. They believed in an almighty God. And if we lose that faith, we're clearly on the wrong path. And unfortunately, we're going down that path. This is a funny thing that, and I use funny also sarcastically, that what governs a functioning human society is written down in the Bible. It's the Ten Commandments, right? And I don't know anybody, other than if they're insane or just evil, who can disagree with any one of those 10 commandments, whether they're Christians or not. And there's an interesting, at this point I can go into another thought here. One of the most important steps that I took was listening based on a recommendation to a radio show called Let My People Think, which was run by Dr. Ravi Zacharias, who passed away a couple of years ago, a Christian apologist who was compared to, who was told the C.S. Lewis of our time. And I wasn't a Christian then, I wasn't even a deist, but I just listened to the program. And one thing I had struggled with was, I'd always thought of myself as a good person, as a moral person, as somebody who would never, ever hurt anybody. And yet I was living with the burden of having hurt people, particularly some people that I loved. I didn't love my mother emotionally, but I still, she was my mother, and I lied to her, and I was married in Germany, and I left that woman. So I did a bunch of things that I would have decried, I would have criticized severely, and I had to kind of come to grips with this situation. And Dr. Zacharias happened to, surprise, surprise, talk about morality, and he pointed out that there is a universal moral law that is, no matter what religion you are part of, or whether you are religious or not, everybody pretty much agrees to those tenets, primarily rooted in the Ten Commandments. And then he took the next step, and there's the logic, and the logical mind followed him. So where there's a universal law, there has to be a lawgiver, because we can't make up our own laws. And bang, I immediately became a deist. There has to be somebody outside of us, outside of humanity, who has given us that law. And I wasn't there yet, but you take the next step, and is also making sure that this law is enforced. So as we wander away as a society from that God-given law, I'm just answering the question with a negative. We are on the wrong path. We have to stay within God's moral law, period.
When we wander from it, does it make us ripe for indoctrination?
Clearly, absolutely. So what we have today is that, anything goes. Live and let live. As long as you don't hurt anybody. Well, a lot of people who live by that tenet wind up hurting themselves. And anything goes. Does that really include? I have a friend who lives in an estate that has a lot of Christians, and I don't want to get into detail here, but she has a child in a Christian school, and I don't want to say the denomination. That's kindergarten, and there's a young man, a 4-year-old, who is undergoing sex change right now with Christian parents. Now, they lost faith in God. They strayed far away. If you're a true believer in what Jesus taught and what's written in the Bible, you will not even think about something like that.
It's a good thing to distinguish, because we can be something culturally, fundamentally, or deeply within our own hearts. So we can be cultural Christians. We can be Christians because we live in a country that was founded on those beliefs, or we can have the Holy Spirit and Jesus within our hearts. And the behavior that will come from a person is totally different if it's just a cultural belief. You were raised in a Christian home, you're going to a Christian school, versus the Holy Spirit is actually within you. So thank you for distinguishing between the two.
Yes, and I just want to add to this, where it can easily be misunderstood by non-believers. Christianity is founded on a 4-letter word, LOVE, and this is and it says in the Bible, God is love. God loves us, and we are commanded to love others the same way we love ourselves. And I have gotten to a point, there's this question that a lot of Christians are struggling with is, should we treat a convicted murderer lovingly? If Adolf Hitler were to show up tomorrow, would I treat him with the same kind of love I might want to treat you? And I have wrestled with this for a long time, and most of the time the answer was, I can't do that. But ultimately, it's not about the other person, it's about what's in here. And so, and I was convicted of that, actually. This is how I came to that conclusion. There was a different situation that my now ex-wife, who was the one who opened the door to Jesus for me, who was the one who suggested that I listen to Ravi Zacharias. We once left church, and there was this woman at the exit of the church driveway, the parking lot. She was begging, and I said to my wife, "I'm not going to give her anything. She can go inside in the church." And she said to me, "It's not about her. It's about your willingness, your willingness to give. That's what should drive you here." And I was convicted of it.
Jesus even says in the Bible, if a man slaps you, turn the other cheek, give it to him so he can, do the same to the other one. Same with your clothes. Like, that is a reflection upon your own heart. It's not to say, I condone your behavior, I condone the way you're showing up. It's to say, my heart is full of love and I'm humble and I know that
Yeah.
you're hurting and you need to see that demonstration of love. I feel like earlier in our conversation, you were explaining how there wasn't a clear definition of what love really means. Some of that is maybe from the culture, some of it's from family. And I think we miss out on truly understanding what love means, because especially in America, it's a very hypersexual society. Love is getting your pleasures met, getting your needs met, going from one person to the next and trying them out like a car. How would you define love? And is your definition based upon the biblical definition?
Well, let's see how Jesus showed his love for others. One word: service. When he was obviously he operated on earth as a human, but he was a very gifted human, and probably aware that he knew that he had powers that nobody else had. Yet anytime there was a chance for him being served, he served others. He washed the feet of the disciples, and he did things. The miracles he performed were not in his own service. It was always either to give a message or which serves others as well, but also, help others to the extent they needed help at the time. He brought Lazarus back to life. None of that was. It's all service, okay, and serving others is actually extremely fulfilling. And there are non-believing psychologists who will tell you that is absolutely true. Okay, so I'm not saying anything that's controversial.
No, not at all. I agree with that it is service, and it's not. I want to take it a level deeper, because sometimes it just can seem like a checkbox. Okay, well, then I will go do X, Y, and Z. Okay, great, I've served you, but I don't feel anything, right? You can serve people without love, but the kind of service that he's doing is so humble. It's so giving. It's so generous. It's so unconditional. It's this deeper, profound kind of love that's so much more than just, okay, I checked the box because I served someone, and yet I'm serving you still because I'm trying to serve myself. It's just so much bigger. You're absolutely not focused on your own needs.
I agree. There is nothing more satisfying, more fulfilling than when somebody says thank you with a smile. Okay, that's when you know that you did good, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a smile. And if it's not a thank you, it doesn't matter either. You don't want anything back. That's what's called unconditional love. And we talk about love and service, that they go together. So there are some people I don't like, but we talked about this. But now in general, that's general population, not the evil people. People I don't like, but I have to love them too, and I want to. And sometimes there's a bit of a barrier I have to overcome, and I'm not Jesus, okay? I might not wash ugly feet, especially when they're really dirty. But we're human, and we are all sinners, and there's only so far we can stretch. We try our best, but we will fail. We will fail, and that's why we are forgiven for our failures. As you probably know, I just learned this. the translation from I think from Hebrew for the word of sin is actually missed the mark.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we miss the mark all the time.
Yep. Yep. But we just pray to increasingly become more and more
Yes.
like him, right?
Yes, and one more thing I wanted to add here. So again, if somebody who doesn't understand what we were just talking about, this kind of service and love does not include self-denial.
Yeah, that's a key piece to clarify. Please keep going with that.
Yeah, because self-denial just then will actually result in your inability to love and serve.
Yeah. You absolutely have to still meet your own needs. You're not completely denying yourself of food or shelter or financial means, but it is the way that I tend to phrase it is dying to yourself. You know, you wake up in the morning and you pray and say, Lord, may I just die to myself. And that's not in a suicidal kind of manner, a malicious manner, but it's saying, move my fleshiness out of the way, move my ego out of the way. So I'm not so focused on myself and I'm hollowed out and available for whatever you want to do through me. So that way I may serve people in an unconditional way through love, which that deep love comes from him. When you were in the KGB, they came to you calling you back and you didn't go. And it's all because of what we're talking about, right? Because of love. Let's dive into that with your daughters.
Yeah, so up until that moment that I'm going to get to in a second, to me, love was just driven by sexuality, but not entirely. I mean, I've had feelings for the two women I had been in love with, and they were both Germans. My first love and the one I married. I really loved them. I liked them. I wanted to be with them. It wasn't just a sexual interaction, but that was it. So it was selfish, ultimately, because I wanted something. I was going to give something, but I wanted something back. So, and here's another situation where I was not in charge of my own decisions because I was dating and actually married a woman in the U.S. Who was illegal. Not getting too much into detail. That's 60 Minutes interview, I think, has it. I married her for her to become legal, and she was good company for me because she couldn't possibly figure out that I wasn't 100% American. And when you get intimate with somebody, there's always that danger. Any born American female would have said, there's something you talk funny, you use words that we normally don't use. And oh, by the way, when you're counting on your fingers, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, that's not how we count. So, and so she was safe, and she was very pretty. Was a good companion, and she decided to get pregnant. I did not participate in that decision. So there was another person who had a radical influence on my life. Hard decision to get pregnant because, I was there from day one when my child by the name of Chelsea came into this world, and it was pretty dramatic. The mother's water broke early, and because of that, Chelsea was in an incubator for like the first 6 days of her life. And then I took her home. We decided to live together because I couldn't possibly live in couldn't pay for 2 apartments. So, so I was there watching this baby grow up. And this is when it happened, and it snuck up on me. I wasn't aware of it, but I fell just deeply in love with this kid as she grew bigger and started communicating just with gestures or with her eyes. And she was so pretty. And just like yesterday, I was in a church group, and this group is significantly younger than I am. I'm by far the oldest member of that group, but I love it there. And they had a lot of kids with them, the similar age. And I was just looking at these kids, and I told them afterwards when we were talking about prayer requests and praise reports, and I just said, I just want to pray for all these children, because I am so delighted and so energized by just looking at these wonderful little creatures. And so that happened to me in a big way, just with this one child. And I was not aware that at this point I had become the victim of an attack of unconditional love. The only thing that she could give back to me was a smile. She couldn't even talk yet. She was 18 months old when the KGB wanted me back home behind the Iron Curtain, because not because they didn't trust me or anything like that. I was highly regarded, received the second highest decoration of the Soviet Union. 2 years before, they wanted to call it quits. And so because they thought somehow they got spooked by whatever, somebody may have told them something that indicated that I might be arrested soon. And that's the last thing they wanted to happen, not because they cared about me. They cared about the problems that I would cause in jail. Okay, I found out many, many years later that I was cannon fodder for them. But being in jail, I would cause a lot of problems, because they would have to get me out of jail, because if they didn't get me out, they wouldn't get any more candidates to sign up for that job. And that caused a lot of stuff, manipulations, maybe arresting a U.S. business person and so forth. So they wanted me back in safety. And the way they communicated that was to a protocol of science. There was a spot that we agreed that where was going to work, which was a beam supporting the elevated section of the A train, the subway, and they could put some basic science there, such just to communicate, like with 2 words or something like that. And one of them was the danger signal, and that was the loudest of them all. The others weren't just chalk marks. This one was a red spot. And so one morning I go to the subway station and routinely look at that beam, and there's the red spot. And I said, oh, and I can't use the curse word. It starts with an S. I was thinking that because I wasn't ready, because I had been thinking in my mind how I could support this little baby who I loved when I'm not there anymore, when I'm physically not there to take care of her. Our mother had only 4 years of schooling, so I knew for sure that Mom didn't have the ability to take care of this child, and Mom also didn't have a supportive family in the country. She had a couple of sisters who weren't doing that well either. So I was concerned that this girl that I loved would grow up in a slum. So I had not come up with a solution. So I just ignored the sign. I went to work. I spent there staring on my computer screen, not writing any code, just trying to figure out what to do next. I decided to play for time. And I managed to play for time for just about a couple of weeks. There were good reasons that I had that time, because there was a situation one time when I was unable to communicate with whatever communication means I had, because I had an accident, and my right arm was in a sling, my shoulder was in pain. So and then I explained it to them. So there was always a chance that something like this happened. But eventually they lost their patience because I did not respond at all. And so they broke one of the rules. There was a hard and fast rule for a diplomat, an agent under diplomatic cover, never to meet an illegal in the country where the illegal operates. Well, they sent somebody to see whether I still exist or what's going on, and he knew where I was taking the train to work. I had to tell him. And so one morning I'm standing there waiting for the train, and there comes this man slowly coming up to me. It was still dark, and he whispered into my ears the words that I will not forget for how long I have a memory is you got to come home or else you're dead. Now, there were two ways to interpret this because he spoke with a heavy Russian accent. That could have been a misuse of the word dead. Maybe he should have said you're busted. But you also had to take it seriously because if the Russians had any idea that I was defecting, that would have meant I'm in harm's way. So now I was at a point where I had to make a decision because I knew that they knew that I knew. So I had to make a decision. I couldn't just stall anymore. If I stall anymore, I'm in danger. So they, through shortwave radio, they asked me to pick up a container in a park. It's called a dead drop operation that had a passport and travel money so I could go to Canada, get out of the country, and eventually get exfiltrated out of Canada. And I still hadn't made a decision when I went to that spot in the middle of the night. And the protocol was that the person who put the container, which was supposed to be a crushed oil can, in that particular spot that was very, very easy to find. It was a hollowed out trail at the bottom of the tree in a park. He put the sign that says, okay, go pick up the oil can. I put it there. And I go there and there's no oil can. It never happened ever in all my years as a spy. This always worked like clockwork. And so I was like still walking around in a daze. I said, what's going on? About 15 minutes later, I walked out of the park. And this is where I credit the Holy Spirit with making the decision on my behalf. Because I walk out of this park and I couldn't make it up if I wanted to because it's so bizarre, so to speak. Because I walk out of the park, and the moment I leave the park, my subconscious says, I'm staying. Against all rational reasoning, because everything that was good for me was going back to the other country, to my home country. The wall was still up. The communism was still ruling. I was going to go home as a conquering hero and join my German family and have significant monetary awards lying there, dollars and all this. And everything that was on the other side of that scale was bad. So the FBI was going to arrest me possibly. The KGB might come after me if they think I am defecting or did already defect. And the only thing that was good on this side of the scale was Chelsea. And I did the irrational thing. I followed the Holy Spirit, and it worked. It had to work, and he gave me another. I get a lot of my original thoughts through my subconscious, and I think the Holy Spirit is using the subconscious as a messenger to my conscious mind. The other thing that popped into my subconscious was, oh, you tell him you had AIDS. And I did that, and that convinced them that I would die, actually. They had no reason to not believe it because they didn't know that I had a child. They never checked on me. I knew that. And the the name I was born with is listed in the German Social Security register as having passed away in 1989, early 1989. So yeah, and so God rewarded me for showing that love to a child by getting me onto the right path that eventually made me into a believing Christian and living right now. And that's a reward on this earth, living right now, believe it or not, the best phase of my entire life. And it started with love.
You may not have known it at the time, but you were being obedient to what he was asking you to do without even understanding, and that is faith.
Yeah, no, I didn't know it. I thought it was my own decision. Of course, I didn't know that God does that in people's lives. Occasionally, there's some direct intervention by the Lord. Very often, he uses other people to do something. Like one of the reasons I can talk to you today is a betrayal by a KGB employee who shared my name and my existence with British intelligence. If the FBI doesn't find me, I stay undercover, not working for the KGB, but I was uncomfortable telling the FBI, what I was doing because I didn't know what the consequences. So, that God then used some other people to do stuff, and that's where my testimony in church is actually going. And then there's people that actually influence you directly. And I've been reacting to a lot of people asking, giving me suggestions, helping me doing this, open my eyes to, and they're the most frequent interactions. But it's always the people that are coming to me. I'm not seeking them out anymore. They're just coming to me all the time, and it happens. And you're part of that crowd, because thank you for that interview. It was unexpectedly really, really, really good. I didn't know what to expect. I don't know you, right? Now I know you.
It's so beautiful how he pieces everything together. And especially when you know him, you're obedient. He knows that you're going to be obedient, or that you're seeking to increase that in your life. Then, more than you can ever expect will come in. Like, we cannot control life, period. But if we can just put it in his hands, it will become more than we ever thought it would be. And so I'd love to ask you, Jack, if we move forward, your children have grown up. I know they're different ages. I consider fathers to be figures till the very end. Even when we're adults, we still need our parents as mentors and as friends. So how are you raising your children now, and how is that influenced by your past?
Well, it's kind of really tough because two of my children are Germans, and they live in Germany. So we have little interaction. They know that I'm the father. They respect me. They like me. I can't say they love me, because I would I would be making an assumption. To the extent I can influence them, but that's very tough. Germany is has become a rather atheistic, non-believing society. I've been to Germany on my book tour, and I was actually really saddened by the fact that even a lot of Christian communities and churches aren't really solid believers. There's a lot of feel-good sentiment going on in the German church. My two adult American children, one of them lives far away. He lives in New Jersey, and I'm in Austin, Texas. He is suffering quite a bit from what I don't dare diagnose, but he he is not happy. He is functional in life, but not happy, and is part of the angry generation. And it's very difficult to get in there, particularly since the interaction is infrequent and not very deep. So all I can do is with him, I can pray for him. I pray for the others as well. My daughter is close by. She lives only an hour away from where I'm at right now. She believes in a God. One day, I think she gets to a point when she knows that I'm a full-blown Christian, and I'm waiting the same way my ex-wife waited for the right moment and come up with the right approach to open our eyes. So, and my youngest daughter, she was 9 years old when she volunteered, when there was never a thought I'd spoken to her about this, that she wanted to get baptized. She has never set foot in a non-Christian school, and she's very, very bright and had a revelation about who God was very, very early in life. And unfortunately, her mom and I were divorced. I fought for the marriage, but in the end, Mom was actually right. We never really figured out how to interact with each other on a daily basis. We were united when it came to the big decisions and when it came to our faith. But ultimately, the marriage was very tense. So just to finish this up, the divorce is as good as a divorce can get. My ex watched the interview with Jordan Peterson, which aired about 3 weeks ago, and I sent her the private section of it, which is where Jordan goes into the process of evangelization, and how this all came about. Which there is an interview on my website as well where my ex-wife and I actually are on stage and talk about it, and this is what I shared, how I remember all of this. And Shauna, was my ex-wife, called me and told me that she cried, and my appearance actually strengthened her faith again. And so, with the interaction that her and I now have, and the fact that our child is witnessing all of this, is, I think, the best thing that can happen for this kid, but also for the two of us. I'm not bragging. It's just it takes two to behave the way we did and to process the challenge that we had. And I will never stop loving this woman, by the way, because she was the love of my life. When we had a phenomenal time together until the problem. It's twofold, and I'm only talking about my aspect of it. To me, the marriage became routine. It was all about serving with deeds and stuff, rather than spending time and just saying I love you at least once a day. And that's one of the things that one of the messages that if somebody had told me at the time, and we may have been able to save the marriage, but it didn't happen. So, but I'm ready, willing, and able to share that piece of wisdom with others, which it's gonna happen sometime soon. And I'm going to run a podcast myself, sort of similar to. Will be emulating the business model of Jordan Peterson, which build a community and then work with that community and help them, not tell them what to do and how to be, but help them with their issues. it's going to be a while, and it's going to be hard work, but this is part of the purpose for my life. Number one is taking care of Trinity. What a name for a daughter. So that that she's not limited when choosing a path for her life, whatever that means. That could be college or it could be something else. And number two is, doing what I just told you, becoming a mentor, a senior advisor to younger people, particularly younger men, but not necessarily just the very young, because I just told you I could have benefited from my own advice a couple of years ago. So, and that's pretty much all I have left to say.
There's so much power in the testimony. God works in incredible ways, and that's undisputable. When you humbly say, look, this is what happened. I had nothing to do with it. He came in and he changed me. I was this way, and now I'm this way. It just gives me chills. It's so beautiful. Jack, thank you.